Hi everyone. So this week we're going to talk about the statistical methods that we can use, the very simple statistical methods that we can use to give really important kind of context and interpretation to data points that we might find. So the basic principle here is, just like we never want to take a quote out of context, we can't really infer anything meaningful from a single number, right? And so what we need to do is, anytime we're looking at data for a story, we want to make sure that we have a broad enough data set that we can really generate some comparisons between a given data point, or within those data points, or especially between a particular data point and those other data points, right? And what we're looking for here is we basically want to know, in general, what are the patterns within a data set, and especially if we're looking at a single statistic, where does that statistic fall within the broader data set? This gives us a sense of whether something is typical or atypical, right? That's basically what we're looking for. A lot of times stories are what is atypical, or it may be a question of something being much more typical than we expect it is, right? But either way, we need to have a broad enough data set, and we need some methods for understanding where individual data points fit within it. So to do this exercise, we're going to start looking at actually CitiBike data. So CitiBike data is happily readily available. This is released actually in two major formats that we've talked about already. One of them is the downloadable, the historical files, which we can see here. Okay, which if we look closely, we can see many of them are CSVs. Okay, so that's one file type that we're familiar with. The other one, which we're not going to start working with just yet, is going to be a JSON data format. So we're going to be looking at that later in the semester, but for our current purposes, we're going to stick with our CSV data and try to understand a little bit about how CitiBike is used. So the first thing I want to point out here is that very typically we're given actually very little information about what this data is or contains. We were given an overview on this main page of what the included fields are that we can expect, so that's helpful. But for example, we can see here that there isn't really a file description in any case, so it's really up to us to try to infer what these files are about. Now, as is very common in a case like this, if we look, we can see there does seem to be a naming convention here, so we see 201307, 201308, 201309, and probably pretty quickly we're going to infer that this is actually a year-month structure, and in part because it is appears to be chronological, and as we scroll down we see that in fact we get all the way to the bottom here. The most recent available one is 201707, which makes sense that July 2017, there might be a couple month lag in their publishing this data. So this kind of makes sense, right? Now, interestingly, something that I haven't seen before is this JC format. So the first thing that I noticed right off the bat is that it says JC dash, and then it also has the same timestamp format. It only starts in 2015. The other really notable thing about this is the files are much, much smaller. And so right away my question is, what is the difference between this main one and this JC version? Is it some kind of test or pilot program? Is it some edit of the data? There's maybe some clues here. It says the data has been processed from trips that are taken by staff or from test stations. So maybe it's that. Before I go any further, I'm going to try and understand. Now, one strategy that I would probably use here is I would actually just download a copy of each of the data sets. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to download the 2017-07 in both cases. Okay, because one thing I can do is just compare them visually, right? Try to see if I can tell via inspection, as we would say, what the difference is between these two things. So I'm going to go ahead and download this one. I like to put it right on my desktop. So that's the JC version, and now I'm going to look at the regular version. Okay, now I want to point out that this is a pretty big file. This 2017 July file is over 60 megabytes. That's a pretty big file. That is a file that will probably crash if I try to open it in Microsoft Excel, which is one of the reasons why having our hands on a text editor and inspecting CSV files that way first is always a really good idea. because by the time Excel opens it, if at all, it might take a long time, and it may also just crash your system. So I'm going to specifically go in here and open this with text. And so this looks like this is the main, I don't know if it's the main file, but it is the larger file. And this seems to include everything that I would expect. So we can see the column, what we could interpret as the column headers up here, right? This matches basically what was described on that page. It's nice that they gave that to us. And so it gets a little bit easier to read these as time goes on, but just scanning this, I can say, okay, it's Metropolitan Bedford. It gives us a latitude, longitude, Bedford Avenue, Nassau. Okay, so this seems to be pretty much what I expected. So now I'm going to look at the JC version and see how that differs. So here's the JC version. Again, I'm going to make sure to open this with text edit. And it looks like it provides the same information, right? But it's obviously not identical, and it's obviously not identical because the initial trip is different, right? The initial trip here starts at 8 minutes after the hour, maybe 8 seconds after the hour, and goes until 5 minutes after the hour. And we see Grove Street Path, Exchange Place, Safe Avenue. So I'm still kind of at a loss to understand what the distinction is between these two files. They obviously are distinct. One of them is much larger than the other, but so far it's a little tricky. I don't honestly know. So what I'm going to do is, this is again why, metadata is really important for us. So there's a few strategies I can use. So my first strategy, of course, is I'm going to search the internet, and I'm just going to say, what are the JC CitiBike files? So yeah, I was doing this earlier. So what does this mean? And I don't really get an answer, right? But one thing that it does pop up, okay, is Jersey City. Now, intuitively to me, this seems like a good lead, right? This isn't an answer. This isn't definitively telling me that those JC files are Jersey City, but it obviously matches in the initials. The idea that CitiBike would be in Jersey City, that it would have started later, a couple of years later than New York City, also makes sense. But how am I going to be able to check this, right? How am I going to actually kind of verify this? Well, if I go back to my data, one of the things that I remember is that I have access to the latitude and longitude of the stations, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start mapping, and I'm going to see if I can find the start and end locations of some of these JC file stations, because some of them look like they could be in New York City, right? Exchange Place is the name of a place in New York. Newport Parkway sounds less familiar to me, right? But especially if I'm not like 100% familiar with New York City, this is something that I would want to confirm, right? So this is the start station ID. So I'm going to go now to Google Maps, right? Or I could go to OpenStreetMaps. Let's see if OpenStreetMaps is it. OpenStreetMaps is an open source mapping service. A lot like Google Maps, but open source. Let's see where it puts me. Anywhere? Said go. Not okay. So it's somewhere in New York. Maybe if we zoom in. A couple didn't really zoom us into a great level of detail there. All right. I'm going to cave at the moment. I'm going to go back to Google. Okay. And this is defaulting me to New York, of course, because it's using my IP address to determine where I am. And let's see. Okay, so this is where? Super Columbus Drive. Aha! This is in Jersey City. Okay, so my suspicion is now mostly confirmed that that JC file is in fact about Jersey City. So as you can see, right off the bat, we actually have to do some verification with our data. And it's really important, again, that when we're dealing with these files, we are savvy about the way that we even look at them, right? Because I guarantee you that if I double-clicked on that main CitiBike file, I would end up with I would end up having Excel hanging for like several minutes. So now that I have determined that which file I want to use, so I'm not that interested in the Jersey City file, to be honest. I'm much more interested in the New York City file. So what I'm going to do is now, I'm going to do this very crudely to start. Over the course of the term, we're going to look at, one of the things we're going to be doing is using different tools for different tasks to make them as efficient as possible. But right off the bat here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to scroll through here. I'm just going to try and capture everything from, say, July 1st, right? So I'm just going to keep scrolling until I get past July 1st, and we'll see, that's going to take a while. In fact, I'm not going to scroll. I'm going to use the sidebar because otherwise it will take forever. Okay, so here we are. I'm just looking. I know this is maybe a little hard to see, but if I look at this date, I see July 3rd. So maybe I'm just going to go back up. I'm not going to worry too much. I'm going to look at trying to get early. There we go. Pretty close. A little bit further, that's 9 p.m. Okay. Again, I'm not going to worry too much about this. I am really just going to start here. I'm going to pick a spot here, and I'm going to select everything between there and the top of the file. Okay. Copy that, create a new file, convert it to plain text, paste it in, and I'm going to save this as July 17 CitiBike edit. Okay, and I'm going to let it do a txt file. And somewhere it's going to let me go on my desktop. Okay, so I'm going to save this file. In this file, I can actually go ahead and just do an inspection in here. So I can say get info, and one thing it's going to do is tell me how much space it takes up. So it's still 10 megabytes, but we're going to give it a shot. I'm going to try to open this with Microsoft Excel. So in order to do that, because I saved it with the TXT, I'm going to have to come here and say Microsoft Excel. And this is still probably going to take a minute, because 10 megabytes is still a reasonably large file for Excel. Nope, I don't want to do that. I don't know what it is. How do we do? Oof. Even this is too much for my Excel. Oh, nope, there we go. Okay. So we notice that something has gone wrong here, right? And the main thing that's gone wrong is that it hasn't actually treated this as a comma-separated file. So I have two options. One that I can try, which is just changing the extension here. Okay, so that it knows how to interpret it. And your computer is always going to be second guessing you. You're in charge. Say use CSV. And let's see if that solves it. Great. So now we have a reasonably workable subset of data. I am going to go through at a certain point and look for, try to confine my data set to just my July 1st entries. And again, this is just for the sake of argument here, right? Imagine that we're doing a story where we want to know something about the CitiBike rides that were taken on July 1st, right? Could imagine any number of reasons why we might want to do that. So when we come back, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we do some basic measures of central tendency, which is our mean and median, and distribution, in order to characterize this data set, understand some of the sort of typical features about it. So I will see you all back here in a minute.